Our gospel lesson this morning is from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 2, verses 23, and a little bit into chapter 3, verse 6. As you're able, please rise for the reading of the gospel. One Sabbath, he, meaning Jesus, was going through the cornfields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, "Have you ever read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need of food? He entered the house of God, where Abiathar was the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat. And he gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for humankind, not humankind for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." Again, he entered the synagogue, and there was a man there who had a withered hand. They watched him to see whether he would cure him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, "Come forward." Then he said to them, "Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath? To save life or to kill?" But they were silent. He looked around at them with anger. He was grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately conspired with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. This is the gospel of our risen Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, according to Mark. Thanks be to God. Indeed, y'all may be seated. Those of you that use the Sunday school materials would have heard a lesson this morning based on Matthew's version of this event. How many of you were in the class that uses that? Okay, almost all of us. There's a few differences, but it's basically the same story. Mark just kind of condenses it. He's got the Reader's Digest version. But one thing you see is a concern of what is going on Sabbath. And we talked about that in our class, about different things. Many of us, when we were growing up, could do a whole lot of things on Sunday. That's what we consider Sabbath, typically, at least in Christianity. Some traditions still consider it Friday night to Saturday night. Seventh-day Adventists do that. And of course, the Jewish people still consider that day a Sabbath. But for us, every Sunday is like a little Easter. So that has become, in Christianity, our Sabbath day. Traditionally, that's a day when we rest and we worship and we dedicate it to God in what ways that we can. But our culture has changed that quite a bit over the last 40-something years. Many of us remember different things. Has it changed for you in your life? Is Sunday still a special day? And it very much is for me, even though that's one of the days I do work as a pastor. So I have to take my Sabbath day on a different day. The point isn't so much what you do on this day and what rules you follow. And that's what Jesus is trying to teach them, even back then. Because plucking grain was work. Remember what I had said about some other rules that were in effect when Jesus was trying to teach things a little bit different. And Jesus didn't do away with the law. He actually called people to the spirit of the law, not so much the man-made law, but the laws of God. And it was an invitation for them to live into what God has taught God's people. Plucking grain on the Sabbath for sustenance shouldn't have been considered work. But again, the Pharisees over the years have built the fence a little bit further and a little bit further, so that as long as you don't violate the things that they had written down, then you won't really violate the main one, which was to honor the Sabbath day and keep it holy. So they came up with all these different things. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't walk so far, but a Sabbath day's journey, I think you said this morning, Al. But if a sheep fell in the well, that's Matthew's version, Jesus tells them, well, you would surely pull it out, wouldn't you? I kind of wanted to joke this morning, but I didn't, so I'll share it with them and get my corny jokes. But I said, it depends if it was a bad sheep or a good sheep. But at any rate, Jesus made a point that it's okay to be merciful. And what does work and what does honoring the Sabbath really mean? And it really means what's in your heart. Now, in this passage, we also have this man who just happens to be in the synagogue on that day. And you know, Jesus does a lot of stuff on the Sabbath that really gets under some of the Pharisees' skin. He's done it before. They're waiting for him to do it again. Now, whether or not this man had any part in the plot, we don't know. He might have just been invited to be in the synagogue that day just by chance because they expected Jesus to show up and keep teaching and offending and challenging what they thought was tradition. But it isn't the man's fault if he was manipulated, is it? He's still sitting there with a withered hand. He's crippled in some way. And notice what happens here. This isn't like the blind man that calls out to Jesus when Jesus is walking by. You know that story, right? He says, "Son of David, have mercy on me." He's asking Jesus to heal him, right? Another one comes to Jesus and says, "If you would you heal me?" This man is just sitting there among everybody else. Maybe he's been seated in such a way that Jesus can't miss seeing him. He's right there. And it's not quite like the evangelist in a tent, you know, where somebody sits in the front row and it's kind of a stage thing. It wasn't like that either. Because there's a real healing that took place here. But what I'm trying to point out to you is this man didn't ask Jesus anything. He was just present, listening. And maybe didn't even realize when Jesus said, is it lawful to heal or to kill on the Sabbath? And the Pharisees had no answer. He was probably thinking about the question too. Maybe he was wondering, could Jesus heal me on the Sabbath? Maybe not. Maybe he was thinking about something else, but Jesus invites him to come forward. And Jesus commands him, stretch out your hand. And when he does, in an act of faith, a hand that wouldn't listen to him, we don't know for how long. We don't know if it's a lifelong thing or if it's something that happened maybe as a result of a stroke where people lose the ability to move. But for whatever reason, he obeys and stretches out his hand and he's healed. And maybe his hand was even withered. It was obvious that it wasn't in use anymore. You know, you do lose muscle mass when that happens. And he's restored in such a way that it's unmistakable. If I were sitting there in the synagogue, I can't imagine how that would make me angry. Because the man who was healed, I don't think he'd have been angry. Do you? Wouldn't you think he would have a look of joy like, wow, my hand worked? You know, maybe he even showed off a little bit because he would have been excited for that. But there were some, and as Mark writes, Mark is full of this sense of urgency. Immediately everything, then this, then that, all the way through to the climax of what happens to Jesus. But in this case, the immediately thing isn't a good thing. The immediately thing is that the Pharisees immediately go out and start plotting against Jesus to try to destroy him. What was going through my mind when I was sitting in Sunday school is I was wondering, will plotting work too? Considering that was their job to protect the law, and that's kind of what they were doing, they were working on the Sabbath too. So they were guilty of the very thing that they were upset about Jesus doing, and that's working on the Sabbath. They thought healing was working. But Jesus had just told them, listen, if you have a sheep that falls down the well, yeah, it's a valuable animal to you, but out of mercy, you would pull it out. You wouldn't just let it there until Monday, until the first day of the week, Sunday. You'd pull it out. You wouldn't wait. Only because you want to have water. But just out of mercy for the sheep, you wouldn't need to sit there for 24 hours until it wasn't Sabbath anymore. You rescue. Or what if it was your child that was hurt? Would you try to help them? Or would it be work to put a bandage on them, stop the bleeding? Jesus is making a point. And they're uncomfortable with it. So they just react in anger. But I call that to your attention because this man, no matter the reason he was there, responds to Jesus' command to stretch out his hand. So what does that mean for us today? What can we learn from that? So often when we think about our relationship with God, we think about prayer. How many of you think about prayer and it's important in your life? And most often, for most of us, our prayers tend to be requests. Oh Lord, how it rain, we need rain. This past week it might have been, oh Lord, please, we've had enough rain. Or it could be anything, a problem, a challenge, a need for healing even. And we stretch for Jesus. We stretch out to God in need and in want. Whether we're stretching out our hand or whether we're stretching out our heart, whether we're stretching something to reach for God because we need God. That's part of our prayer life. But what about stretching when we don't need or want something, but just stretching for Jesus? Maybe stretching out our hands in praise, in thanksgiving. Stretching for God in a way that we're searching for God by study of Scripture. Stretching for God in such a way that we want to teach others to do that, and to receive God. But not because we want something, but because out of joy that God gives us in our hearts, we want to stretch. We want to stretch ourselves in ways that maybe only God has in mind. Samuel was laying there in his cot in the temple, snug as a bug on a rug, and he hears God's voice. And he probably stretched the first time too. Eli didn't want to stretch. He'd like, go back to sleep. 2 times. After that, go back to sleep. But eventually Eli realizes God is calling this boy who doesn't really understand it yet. So he gives him instructions on how he can stretch to God. Just by responding. It wasn't a physical stretch, but maybe it had something to do with that. Maybe he would have been falling asleep again and hears his voice. But he teaches him to stretch to God to say, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." When God calls you, when God speaks to you, learn from Samuel, learn from Jesus. Stretch out not just your hand, not just your arm, but all of yourself. Stretch out to God and receive what God offers you. Stretching for Jesus is a good thing. Amen?
Amen.